Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at the wildfires that have been burning across LA, and it's a really devastating situation. And while the official cause is still under investigation, there's this whole wave of speculation online about it,
Yeah.
particularly among celebrities blaming arsonists for starting these fires.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So what makes this deep dive, I think, really interesting is this contrast we're seeing
Yeah.
between like the official response,
Yeah.
from the authorities, and then these much more kind of dramatic claims that are circulating on social media.
Right.
Yeah, so we've got a ton of sources here today, news articles, official statements, social media posts, and they really just capture how tense this whole thing is.
I bet.
Like, for example, Henry Winkler, the Fonz,
Yeah.
he tweeted, "There is an arsonist here in LA.
Yeah.
May you be beaten, you unrecognizable. The pain you have caused." It's like,
My gosh.
talking about some strong emotions, right?
Yeah, wow.
And then we also have Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscientist,
Right.
and he shared a video that he claims shows people starting a fire. And the caption was, "People are lighting fires in otherwise non-burning areas of LA."
Really?
Yeah, so you've got all these celebrities like sounding the alarm about arson while, officials are urging caution, saying we need a thorough investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about all this?
Well, it's definitely a complicated situation. I think it's natural for people to look for explanations, especially when faced with something as devastating as these fires.
Yeah.
Fear and anxiety, they just amplify speculation, and social media makes it so much worse.
For sure. In times of crisis,
Yeah.
it's so easy to just like latch on to any explanation that makes you feel like you understand what's happening.
Yeah, you want to feel in control.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Even with all this chatter online, the Los Angeles Police Department, they put out a statement and they said that they haven't received any reports of arson.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to like totally contradict what all these celebrities are saying.
Yeah.
So how do we make sense of all this?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that these fire investigations, they're not simple.
Oh, for sure.
Determining the cause, especially when it comes to arson, it requires so much evidence.
Right.
Eyewitness accounts, especially, in a situation where there's so much stress, this can be really unreliable.
Yeah. Think about it. A wildfire is raging. There's smoke everywhere. People are panicking.
Exactly. Not a situation where you'd expect people to be making accurate observations.
Right.
So investigators, they have to look at the burn patterns, they have to analyze the physical evidence, conduct interviews, they have to rule out all other possible causes before they can say for sure that a fire was arson.
So it's not just as simple as seeing someone near a fire and then assuming they started it?
No, not at all. Rushing to judgment, especially with something as serious as arson, can have some really bad consequences.
Like what?
Well, it can mess with the investigation, it can take resources away from relief efforts, and, it could even lead to people being wrongly accused.
That's a good point. And just to remind everyone of how big this disaster is, we're talking about the Eaton and Palisades fires, both of them still uncontained. Over 27,000 acres burned. Hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated or are under evacuation warnings.
It's just awful.
Yeah, this isn't just, a story we're talking about. It's affecting real people's lives. Even some of these celebrities we've been talking about, like Billy Crystal and Anna Faris, they've lost their homes in these fires.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize.
Yeah, it's really sad. So, going back to these celebrities for a second without saying that, their concerns aren't valid, I am curious why people even, famous people are so quick to point to arson, even without real evidence.
Well, our brains are always looking for patterns and explanations, especially when we're scared or things are uncertain.
That makes sense.
And we have these things called cognitive biases that basically are mental shortcuts, and they can lead us to conclusions that aren't actually supported by evidence.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you give us like an example of how that might apply to these wildfires?
Sure. So take the availability heuristic. This bias makes us overestimate the likelihood of things that are easy to remember or that are really vivid in our minds.
Okay.
So let's say someone sees a video of a fire being started intentionally. That image is going to stick with them. It's going to make them more likely to believe that arson is widespread, even if it's statistically not the most common cause of wildfires.
So just one shocking image can really change how we see the whole situation.
Yeah, it's powerful. And then there's confirmation bias, which makes us look for and interpret information in a way that confirms what we already believe.
Right.
So if someone already thinks it's arson, they're going to be more likely to notice and share information that supports that idea, and they're going to ignore evidence that contradicts it.
So like our brains are playing tricks on us, especially when we're stressed?
Kind of, yeah. These cognitive biases are normal, but we have to be aware of them, especially when we're talking about something as serious as this.
That's so interesting. We're going to continue this deep dive after a quick break, and we'll be examining the complexities of wildfire investigations and how misinformation affects how the public perceives these events. So don't go anywhere.
And, when you think about these cognitive biases, especially this confirmation bias, they can get amplified in these echo chambers on social media.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Like you see people sharing information that just fits with what they already believe, and those social media algorithms, they just keep showing you more and more of what you agree with.
Exactly, and that creates this perfect storm for misinformation to spread.
Like wildfire.
Right, exactly. And in a crisis like this, when having accurate information is so important for everyone's safety, that spread of misinformation, it can have serious consequences.
Yeah, for sure. It can make people make bad decisions or panic when they don't need to, or even do things that put themselves or other people in danger.
Right, so we need to be really careful about the information we're getting, especially online.
So how can people listening become better at figuring out what's true online, especially with all this social media?
Well, first of all, always check where the information is coming from.
Okay.
Is it a news organization that you recognize, a government agency, an expert in the field?
So we shouldn't just trust like some random post from someone we barely know on Facebook.
Exactly. Be careful about information coming from accounts that are anonymous or sources that have a clear bias or are trying to push a specific agenda.
But
Look for reporting that's based on evidence, not just opinions or speculation.
that makes sense. What about those videos and pictures that we see all the time with these claims?
Yeah, those can be tricky. Remember that visuals can be manipulated or taken out of context.
Oh, right.
Just because a video seems to show something doesn't mean that's the whole story.
So basically, don't believe everything you see.
Right, a little bit of healthy skepticism is always a good thing.
For sure. Another thing that I've heard is to double check information.
Ah,
So if you see someone making a claim, see if other reputable sources are reporting the same thing.
yeah, that's a great point. If it's only coming from one weird website or some random social media account, that's a big red flag.
Makes sense. And I think it's also important to remember what we talked about before about our own biases.
Mm-hmm.
We all have them, and they can change how we interpret information.
Right.
So try to be open to different perspectives, even if they challenge what you already think.
Yeah, being humble is really important these days. We have to admit that we don't know everything and be open to learning from others.
Well said. And going back to the wildfires, there's still a lot that we don't know about them. The investigations are still happening, and it's going to take time to get answers about what caused them. So while we're waiting, is there anything our listeners can do to help the people who have been affected?
Absolutely. There are a lot of ways to help. First, you can donate to organizations that are doing relief work, like the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, local community groups. You can also volunteer your time or resources.
Right.
A lot of organizations need help with all kinds of things, distributing supplies, providing shelter, rescuing animals.
And even if someone can't donate money or time, just spreading awareness about the situation and sharing information from sources you can trust can be really helpful.
Yeah, it's all about coming together as a community and helping each other out. And let's not forget about the firefighters who are out there risking their lives. They deserve so much respect and gratitude.
Yeah, they're the real heroes.
Yeah.
It's amazing how something like this, a natural disaster, can bring out both the best and the worst in people.
It is.
We see these acts of kindness and people helping each other, but then we also see fear and blame and all this misinformation spreading.
Yeah, it really shows how complicated we are as humans and how hard it can be to deal with a world where everyone's so connected.
It's definitely something to think about, but it also shows how important critical thinking is and sharing information responsibly so that we can be a stronger society. So before we move on, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
I think the main takeaway is that even though it's understandable to want answers right away, especially during a crisis, we have to resist jumping to conclusions or spreading information that hasn't been verified. Let's all try to be thoughtful about the information we're getting and focus on helping the people who need it most.
It's interesting, we've been talking about the wildfires and all this information flying around, and it makes me think about how important it is to be able to, figure out what's true online.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see so much information these days from all over the place.
Right.
And it can be really hard to know what to trust and what not to trust. This whole situation with the fires, it really shows how we all need to be able to think critically and carefully evaluate where our information is coming from.
Totally. It's so easy to get caught up in all the emotion of a crisis, especially when you're seeing these dramatic pictures and videos and hearing from people you admire, who are really upset. But those are the times when it's even more important to make sure that what you're seeing and hearing is actually true.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that not everyone who shares misinformation is doing it on purpose.
Oh, that's a good point.
Sometimes people just share things without really checking if they're true, so
Mm.
we all need to be careful about what we're passing along and make sure it's coming from a source we can trust.
It's like that saying a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes or something like that.
Exactly. And with social media, it feels like misinformation can spread even faster.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's important to slow down, take a deep breath, and really think about the information we're seeing and sharing.
So to wrap things up, what are some things that our listeners can do to avoid falling for misinformation, not just about wildfires, but about anything?
Well, one of the most important things is to be skeptical of information that just confirms what you already believe or that makes you feel really strongly one way or another.
Okay.
Because those are the times when we're most likely to believe something without really thinking about it. So a little bit of doubt can be a good thing. Exactly. And don't just rely on one source. Look for confirmation from multiple sources that you trust before you believe something is true.
That's good advice. And what about if you're not sure if you can trust a source? Are there any warning signs?
Yeah, definitely watch out for sources that use a lot of emotional language or make really broad statements without any evidence to back them up.
Okay.
And be careful of sources that attack other sources without giving any good reasons.
So we need to be active thinkers, not just passively taking in information.
Exactly. And it's okay to not know everything. Sometimes there isn't a clear answer right away, and it's better to say, I don't know, or I need more information, than to just jump to conclusions or spread something that isn't true.
That's a great point. We live in a world where everyone feels like they have to have an opinion about everything.
Right.
But sometimes the smartest thing you can do is admit that you don't know everything.
I agree. Being able to say, I don't know, shows that you're willing to learn and that you're not afraid to admit when you're wrong. That's a sign of strength, not weakness.
Well said. So, to our listeners out there, remember to be curious, be critical of what you see and hear, and be kind to each other as we try to make sense of all this information.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the wildfires and the challenges of misinformation. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.